The church bells chimed 1 o'clock, their melodious sound echoing across the manicured grounds of St. Augustine's Chapel. Amara Elise stood alone in the bride's chamber, a vision in ivory silk and delicate lace that caressed her smooth, dark skin. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the crystal hairpin securing her veil, the same pin her grandmother had worn on her wedding day 50 years ago. "He's still not here," Amara whispered, her amber eyes meeting her best friend Nora's concerned gaze in the mirror. "No, honey, and he's not answering his phone either." Nora's voice was gentle but couldn't mask the underlying worry. Amara closed her eyes, fighting the rising panic, threatening to overwhelm her. Julian was 30 minutes late to their wedding. The same Julian who prided himself on never being late, who had once driven through a snowstorm just to be on time for their second date. Maybe there's an accident on the highway, Amara reasoned, her heart racing beneath the structured bodice of her gown. His parents flew in from London. He wouldn't just... The door creaked open, and Amara spun around, relief washing over her. But instead of Julian, it was her father who entered, his usual dignified demeanor replaced by a grim expression that made her stomach drop. "Daddy," she questioned, immediately recognizing the look in his eyes, the same one he'd worn when telling her that her mother had passed away 8 years ago. Weathered hands grasped hers, warm and steady. "Baby girl," her father began, his voice cracking slightly. "Julian isn't coming." The words hung in the air, sharp and brutal. Amara felt the room spin slightly as her father pressed a folded note into her hand. She didn't need to read it to know what it contained. Explanations, apologies, perhaps even declarations of cold feet, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that 200 guests sat waiting in the chapel, and her groom had decided their 3-year relationship wasn't worth showing up for. "I need to tell everyone," she said, surprising herself with how calm she sounded despite the hurricane raging inside her chest. "Nora and I can handle that," her father insisted, but Amara shook her head firmly. "No, this is my wedding, or was supposed to be. I'll do it." With a deep breath that did little to steady her nerves, Amara gathered the skirt of her gown and walked the long corridor to the main chapel, her father and Nora flanking her like protective sentinels. Each step felt like wading through quicksand, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her shoulders. The massive oak doors of the chapel swung open, and a sea of expectant faces turned toward her. The organist, misinterpreting her entrance, began playing the wedding march before someone hastily signaled for silence. Amara scanned the crowd. Friends, family, colleagues, all dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate love. Her gaze caught on Julian's parents in the front row, confusion etched across their features. Among the guests in the 4th row sat a man she recognized but couldn't immediately place, tall, broad, shouldered, with intense eyes that seemed to look through her rather than at her. Victor Langston. The memory clicked into place. She had planned his sister's wedding last year, one of her most challenging clients, but also one of her proudest accomplishments. Amara cleared her throat, her voice projecting clearly, despite the crushing weight in her chest. "I want to thank you all for coming today. I'm deeply sorry to inform you that there won't be a wedding." She paused, feeling the collective gasp ripple through the chapel. "Julian has decided not to proceed." Murmurs erupted throughout the crowd, and Amara felt her composure beginning to crack like thin ice on a spring day. She had planned dozens of weddings for other couples, had handled last-minute crises from missing rings to collapsed cakes with unflappable grace, but standing here, the abandoned bride in her own carefully orchestrated celebration, she felt utterly lost. "Please join us in the reception hall," her father interjected, stepping forward. "The food and drinks are paid for, and there's no sense in letting them go to waste." As the stunned guests slowly filed out, offering awkward condolences as they passed, Amara remained rooted to the spot, unable to move. The chapel emptied until only she remained, surrounded by fragrant lilies and delicate orchids that now seemed to mock her with their perfect beauty. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered to the empty room, her voice echoing against the stained glass windows depicting scenes of eternal faith and commitment. "You breathe," came a deep voice from behind her, "and then you take one step, followed by another." Startled, Amara turned to find Victor Langston standing at the back of the chapel, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light stear. "Victor, please," he corrected, moving toward her with measured steps. "We met at your sister's wedding. I remember." Amara attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Peach roses and silver accents. She changed her mind about the centerpieces 4 times. A hint of admiration flashed across Victor's face. 5 times, actually. You handled her indecision with remarkable patience. An awkward silence settled between them as Amara became acutely aware of her wedding dress, the irony of their circumstances not lost on her. She had been stood up at the altar, and here she was, making small talk with a former client about centerpieces. "Would you like me to call someone for you?" Victor offered, his voice gentler than she would have expected from a man known for his ruthless business acumen. The financial magazines often portrayed him as coldly efficient, a self-made millionaire who had built his tech empire through sheer determination and strategic brilliance. Amara shook her head. "My father and Nora are probably wondering where I am. I should." Her voice caught as reality crashed over her again. "I should change out of this dress." "Allow me to accompany you to the bride's chamber," Victor said, offering his arm with old-world formality that seemed at odds with his modern, tailored suit. Perhaps it was shock, or perhaps it was simply the need for something solid to hold on to, but Amara found herself accepting his offer, her hand resting lightly on his forearm as they walked the corridor she had traveled with such different expectations just minutes earlier. Outside the chamber door, Victor paused. "For what it's worth, Miss Elise, any man foolish enough to let you go doesn't deserve a second of your grief." Before she could respond, he pressed something into her hand. A business card, heavy stock with embossed lettering. "When you're ready to talk. About anything or nothing at all. Call me. Day or night." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Amara staring after him, the weight of his card somehow anchoring her amid the wreckage of the day. Inside the bride's chamber, Amara sank onto the velvet settee, her elaborate gown pooling around her like fallen dreams. Her phone buzzed with notifications. Friends, family, all wanting to check on her, to offer comfort or distraction. Among them was a message from Julian, but she couldn't bring herself to read it. Instead, her fingers traced the embossed lettering on Victor Langston's card, something about its tangible solidity offering strange comfort in a day where everything she had planned and hoped for had dissolved like morning mist. His direct gaze and simple offer stood out as something unexpectedly real. "One breath," she whispered to herself, echoing his words, and then one step. She didn't know where those steps would lead her, but as she carefully began removing the pins from her elaborate updo, Amara Elise made a promise to herself. This would not be her ending. It might be the most public and painful failure of her life, but somehow, she would find a way to begin again. What she couldn't possibly know was how intimately Victor Langston would be involved in that new beginning, or that the man who had stood quietly in the 4th row had been watching her shine from afar long before this day of darkness descended. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Savior. 3 hours after what should have been the happiest day of her life, Amara sat at the far corner of her own wedding reception, nursing a glass of champagne and watching as her guests attempted to salvage the celebration. The elegant ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel, which she had spent months perfecting with crystal chandeliers and cascading white orchids, now felt like an elaborate stage for her humiliation. "You should eat something," Nora urged, sliding a plate of untouched canapés toward her. "You haven't had anything all day." Amara shook her head, her throat too tight for food. "I just want this day to end," she whispered, tugging at the simple black cocktail dress she'd changed into after discarding her wedding gown. "I keep thinking I'll wake up, and this will all be some horrible nightmare." The pity in everyone's eyes was almost worse than being abandoned. Wherever she looked, conversations would halt, expressions would shift, and that same sympathetic head tilt would appear. Amara, who had built her career on maintaining composure under pressure, felt herself cracking beneath the weight of their compassion. "Your father's talking about suing Julian for the wedding costs," Nora mentioned, glancing across the room where Mr. Elise was engaged in serious conversation with a cousin who practiced family law. "I don't care about the money," Amara replied, her fingers absent-mindedly spinning Victor Langston's business card on the table. "I just want to understand why. 3 years together, and he couldn't even face me." A shadow fell across their table, and Amara looked up to find Victor Langston standing before her, 2 flutes of champagne in his hands. Unlike the other guests who approached with awkward hesitation, his presence carried a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. "May I join you?" he asked, his deep voice carrying just enough warmth to cut through her fog of misery. Before Amara could respond, Nora stood up, squeezing her friend's shoulder. "I'll check on your dad," she said with a knowing glance between them. Victor settled into the vacated chair, placing one champagne flute in front of Amara. I thought you might need something stronger than what you're nursing, he explained, nodding toward her barely touched glass. Under normal circumstances, Amara might have maintained her professional distance. After all, Victor was still technically a former client, but normal had evaporated the moment Julian had decided not to show. Instead, she accepted the fresh glass, allowing their fingers to brush momentarily, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected current through her skin. Thank you, she murmured, taking a generous sip. The champagne was different, richer, more complex than what was being served to the general guests. Of course, Victor said. And for earlier, in the chapel, Victor's eyes, a striking deep brown with amber flecks that caught the light, studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. No one should have to face that kind of moment alone, he said simply. Amara recognized his expression. It wasn't pity, but something closer to admiration. Yet here I am, still standing, she replied with a hint of the strength that had carried her through the day, though I'm not sure what I'm standing for anymore. Your dignity, Victor said without hesitation. I've seen seasoned executives crumble under far less pressure than what you faced today. Yet you walked into that chapel and addressed everyone with the grace of a queen. A small, genuine smile tugged at her lips for the first time that day. I doubt I looked very queenly. You did, he insisted, his gaze unwavering, and that's precisely why I have a proposition for you. Amara arched an eyebrow, curiosity momentarily displacing her grief. A proposition, Mr. Langston? Victor, he corrected gently. Victor, she amended. I appreciate your kindness today, but I'm not exactly in the right headspace for whatever you're suggesting. A hint of amusement flickered across his features, waifless in nout. I'm not propositioning you, Miss Elise. I'm offering you an escape. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice as though sharing a confidence. Tomorrow morning, I'm flying to my estate on Kiwa Island for the weekend. It's private, peaceful, and, most importantly, completely removed from. He gestured around the room. All of this. I'd like you to join me. Amara blinked in surprise, certain she had misheard. You want me to go away with you, a man I barely... No, I want to give you space to breathe, without everyone watching to see if you'll break, Victor clarified. My sister will be there with her husband, so you needn't worry about propriety. Under normal circumstances, Amara would have politely declined such an offer. But these weren't normal circumstances, and the thought of facing her empty apartment, still filled with half-packed moving boxes and evidence of the life she'd planned with Julian, made her stomach clench with dread. Why would you do this for me? She asked, genuinely puzzled. We're practically strangers. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. A moment of vulnerability that disappeared so quickly she might have imagined it. Perhaps I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself, he said carefully. I too know what it's like to stand alone while everyone watches, waiting for you to crumble. Amara thought of the stories she'd read about Victor's rise to success, the son of a janitor who had clawed his way through elite universities on scholarships, facing down prejudice and doubt at every turn, until he had built Langston Technologies into a billion-dollar empire. The tabloids called him the Ice King for his cool demeanor and strategic brilliance. But the man sitting across from her radiated a warmth that belied that frigid moniker. Besides, Victor continued when she remained silent. My sister hasn't stopped talking about your organizational skills since her wedding. She'll be thrilled to see you again. From across the room, Amara caught her father watching their interaction, his protective instincts clearly warring with his desire to see her smile. Next to him, Julian's mother was wiping away tears while shooting glances in her direction. The suffocating weight of everyone's emotions, their anger, pity, and curiosity pressed down on her chest until she could hardly breathe. Okay, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the decisiveness in her voice. When do we leave? Victor's expression remained composed, but something like pleasure flickered in his eyes. My jet departs at 9 tomorrow morning. I'll send a car for you at 7:30. A jet, of course, Amara murmured, momentarily taken aback by the casual reference to his private aircraft. I should warn you, I haven't packed for a beach weekend. Everything you need will be provided, Victor assured her, his tone making it clear that this was not an unusual arrangement in his world. Just bring yourself. As if on cue, a commotion erupted near the entrance to the ballroom. Amara looked up to see Julian's father engaged in a heated conversation with the event's security. Her stomach dropped at the thought that Julian might have finally decided to make an appearance. Victor followed her gaze, immediately reading the panic in her expression. "Would you like to leave now?" he asked quietly. "God, yes," Amara breathed, already reaching for her clutch purse. With fluid efficiency, Victor stood and offered his hand. When she took it, his fingers closed around hers with gentle strength that somehow anchored her amid the emotional storm. As he guided her toward a side exit, Amara was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them, the speculative glances at their joined hands. "My car is in the lower garage," Victor explained as they stepped into a service elevator that required his keycard for access. "We can be gone before anyone realizes you've left." In the confined space of the elevator, Amara became suddenly conscious of how close they were standing, of the subtle cologne that clung to Victor's skin, sandalwood, and something uniquely masculine. Her body, numb for hours in the wake of Julian's betrayal, sparked to unexpected life in his presence. "I should tell my father," she said, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. "He'll worry." "Text him from the car," Victor suggested as the elevator doors opened to reveal a private parking level where a sleek black Bentley waited, a driver standing attentively beside it. The transition from the bright lights of the hotel to the hushed luxury of Victor's car happened with dreamlike swiftness. One moment, Amara was the abandoned bride at the center of a social disaster. The next, she was sinking into butter, soft leather seats as the Bentley purred away from the Grand Meridian. "Where to, Miss Elise?" Victor asked, his voice breaking through her daze. Amara gazed out the tinted windows at the city lights blurring past. She should go home, should face the apartment and all its painful reminders. That would be the responsible thing to do. But the thought of Victor's offer of sanctuary by the sea, far from pitying eyes and whispered conversations, beckoned like a lighthouse in a storm. Could we go to your place?" she asked hesitantly, immediately adding, "Just until the morning. I can't face my apartment tonight." If Victor was surprised by her request, he didn't show it. Instead, he simply nodded to his driver and then turned back to her. "Of course." As the Bentley changed direction, heading toward the exclusive Admiral's Hill neighborhood, Amara sent a brief text to her father, explaining her decision to stay with a friend for the night. She deliberately omitted mentioning Victor's name, knowing her father would have questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The city fell away behind them as the car wound up the hillside roads, eventually passing through an imposing gate and up a long cypress-lined drive. Victor's home, when it came into view, took Amara's breath away. A modern masterpiece of glass and stone perched on the cliffside, with the twinkling city spread out below like a carpet of stars. "It's beautiful," she murmured, as the driver opened her door. Victor helped her from the car, his hand warm against the small of her back as he guided her toward the entrance. "It's just a house," he said simply, but Amara didn't miss the quiet pride in his voice. Inside, the home revealed itself to be as impressive as its exterior. Soaring ceilings, museum, quality art, and furniture that balanced luxury with comfort. But what captured Amara's attention was the wall of windows overlooking the city, offering a view that made her momentarily forget the day's heartbreak. "Make yourself comfortable," Victor said, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over a chair. Without the formal attire, in just his crisp white shirt with sleeves rolled to reveal strong forearms, he seemed more accessible, less the corporate titan, and more simply a man. "Would you like something to drink? Or perhaps something to eat?" Amara realized with surprise that she was actually hungry now, the knot of anxiety in her stomach having loosened in Victor's calming presence. "Both would be wonderful, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all," he assured her, gesturing for her to follow him to the kitchen, a chef's dream of gleaming stainless steel and warm wood. As Victor moved confidently around the space, retrieving ingredients from the refrigerator, Amara was struck by the unexpected domesticity of the moment. Less than 12 hours ago, she had been preparing to become Julian's wife. Now she was watching Victor Langston, a man known for commanding boardrooms, not kitchens, slice crusty bread, and arrange an impressive charcuterie board with practiced ease. "You cook," she observed, accepting the glass of red wine he offered. Victor's lips curved into a genuine smile that transformed his serious features. "My mother believed no one should rely entirely on others for their basic needs. She taught me to cook, clean, and even sew a decent button before I was 10. A man of hidden talents," Amara murmured. taking a sip of the wine. A rich, velvety Cabernet that bloomed on her tongue. "We all contain multitudes, Miss Elise." "Amara," she corrected him, feeling the strict boundaries of her professional persona softening. "If I'm accepting your hospitality and fleeing to your beach house tomorrow, I think we can move past formalities." Something shifted in Victor's expression, a subtle intensity that made the air between them feel suddenly charged. "Amara," he repeated, her name sounding like something precious in his deep voice. They ate at the kitchen island, conversation flowing more easily than Amara would have expected. Victor asked thoughtful questions about her event planning business, listening with genuine interest as she described her journey from assistant to sought-after expert in luxury celebrations. In turn, he shared stories about the early days of his company, the sleepless nights and doubts he had overcome on his path to success. What struck Amara most was how attentively Victor listened, his focus never wavering from her words, never checking his phone or allowing distractions to intrude. When was the last time Julian had listened to her with such undivided attention? The thought of her former fiancé sent a fresh wave of pain through her chest, and Amara faltered mid-sentence, her composure threatening to crack. Victor seemed to sense the shift immediately, his hand reaching across the counter to cover hers. "It's okay to not be okay, Amara," he said softly. "What happened today would break most people." "I don't want to break," she whispered, fighting against the tears that had been threatening all evening. "I don't want to give him that power over me." Victor's fingers tightened slightly around hers. "Then don't. Break, bend, breathe, but stand your ground. Tomorrow is a new beginning." The warmth of his touch, the quiet confidence in his voice, wrapped around Amara like a protective shield, and in that moment, with the city lights twinkling below and Victor's steady presence beside her, she allowed herself to believe that, perhaps, just perhaps, being left at the altar wasn't an ending after all. What it was, she couldn't yet define. But as Victor showed her to a luxurious guest suite with promises of an early departure to the coast, Amara felt something stir within her that she had thought died with Julian's abandonment. Hope. Fragile and trembling, but undeniably alive. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Victor's private jet as they soared above the clouds. Amara gazed out at the endless blue, still hardly believing she had impulsively agreed to this escape. Across from her, Victor worked quietly on his laptop, occasionally glancing up to check on her. "Second thoughts?" he asked, catching her pensive expression. Amara shook her head, "Just wondering when I'll wake up from whatever bizarre dream this is." She gestured around the luxurious cabin. 24 hours ago, I was getting my hair done for my wedding. Now I'm flying to a private island with a man I barely know." Victor closed his laptop. Sometimes the most unexpected paths lead us exactly where we need to be. The jet began its descent, and through the window, Amara caught her first glimpse of Kiwa Island. Pristine beaches stretched alongside lush greenery, the Atlantic glistening in the morning light. As they touched down on a private airstrip, a weight seemed to lift from her shoulders. Here, no one knew her as the bride who was left at the altar. A sleek Range Rover awaited them, whisking them along scenic roads until they reached iron gates that opened to reveal Victor's estate. A sprawling modern beach house with sweeping ocean views. "Victor," a woman's voice called as they stepped from the car. Amara recognized Lila Langston Carter, Victor's younger sister and her former client, hurrying down the steps to embrace her brother. "And Amara Elise," Lila exclaimed, turning to her with genuine delight. "Victor mentioned he was bringing a friend, but I had no idea it was you." The warmth of Lila's welcome eased Amara's nervousness as they toured the house, all glass and natural wood with breathtaking ocean vistas. Amara found herself relaxing for the first time since her world had imploded. "Your room," Victor announced, opening double doors to reveal a stunning suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the private beach. "I hope it's comfortable." "It's perfect," Amara whispered, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness behind every detail, from the fresh flowers to the selection of books on the nightstand. "Join us for lunch when you're settled," Victor said, his fingers lightly brushing her shoulder as he passed. A touch so brief, yet so affecting that Amara's skin tingled long after he'd gone. After changing into a borrowed sundress that fit perfectly, how had Victor arranged this so quickly? Amara found herself on the oceanfront terrace, captivated by the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. "You look like you belong here," Victor's voice came from behind her. He had changed, too, trading his business attire for linen pants and a casual button-down that somehow made him even more attractive. "It's paradise," she admitted, though I still don't understand why you've brought me here. Victor moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Perhaps I needed the escape as much as you did. Something in his tone made Amara turn to study him. Despite his success and confidence, she sensed a hidden vulnerability. What are you escaping from? She asked softly. For a moment, Victor's carefully composed expression faltered. Loneliness, he admitted, the confession clearly costing him. Success comes with isolation. People see the wealth, the power, but rarely the man. Amara understood suddenly why he had reached out to her. They were both wearing masks, hers of the confident event planner who could handle any crisis, his of the untouchable business tycoon, both hiding their wounds behind carefully constructed facades. I know something about masks, she said, her voice barely audible above the ocean breeze. I've been wearing one since yesterday. Victor's hand found hers on the railing, his touch gentle yet grounding. Perhaps here, we can both set them aside. Lunch was a casual affair on the terrace, with Lila and her husband, Ethan, joining them. The conversation flowed easily, deliberately steering clear of Amara's wedding disaster, for which she was grateful. Instead, they shared stories and laughter, and Amara found herself studying Victor, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled genuinely, how attentively he listened when others spoke, the protective way he watched over everyone at the table. After lunch, while Lila and Ethan went for a beach walk, Victor suggested showing Amara the rest of the property. They strolled through gardens bursting with coastal blooms, past a sparkling infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean, and finally down a private path to the beach. You're quieter than I expected, Victor observed as they walked along the water's edge, waves lapping at their bare feet. Amara smiled ruefully. I'm usually the one filling awkward silences at events, making everyone feel comfortable. But right now, I don't have the energy to be that person. Then don't be, Victor said simply. Just be Amara, whoever that is today. His words unlocked something in her, permission to simply exist without pretense or expectation. Before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her cheeks, the emotions she'd been holding at bay finally breaking through. I'm sorry, she gasped, turning away in embarrassment, but Victor gently turned her back to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. Don't apologize for feeling, he said, his voice low and fierce. Not here, not with me. In that moment, with the setting sun casting golden light across his features, Amara saw beyond the powerful CEO to the man beneath. A man capable of profound understanding and unexpected tenderness. Without thinking, she stepped into his embrace, her face pressed against his chest. Victor's arms encircled her immediately, strong and protective, one hand cradling the back of her head as she finally let herself cry, not just for Julian's betrayal, but for the future she had lost, the dreams that had evaporated in a single moment of abandonment. I have never felt so foolish, she confessed against his shirt, now damp with her tears. I planned perfect weddings for others, yet I couldn't even get my own groom to show up. His failure, Victor said firmly, his voice rumbling beneath her ear. Not yours. Never yours. As her tears subsided, Amara became acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against Victor's body, how natural it felt to be held by him, despite having known him for barely a day. She should step away, maintain some semblance of propriety, yet she found herself reluctant to leave the shelter of his arms. When she finally looked up, she found Victor watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently wiped away her tears with his thumb, the gesture achingly tender. Come, he said softly. The sun is setting. They sat on the sand as the sky transformed into a canvas of orange and pink, the day's light surrendering to the approaching night. In this shared silence, Amara felt something shifting between them, a connection forming that transcended words. I was engaged once, Victor said suddenly, his attention fixed on the distant horizon. 8 years ago, she left 2 weeks before the wedding. Amara turned to him in surprise. Nothing in her research about Victor Langston had ever mentioned a fiancé. What happened? She asked gently. Victor's silhouette stood stark against the amber sunset, his composure revealing the discipline that had built his empire. She claimed marriage to me would stifle her ambitions, that my drive to succeed would overshadow her own path. A bitter smile flickered briefly across his face. The cruel irony was that every step I took towards success was meant for our future, for the family we'd planned to create. Understanding bloomed within Amara. That explains why you approached me after the wedding. You recognized what I was experiencing. I saw myself reflected in your pain, he admitted quietly. That unmistakable anguish of abandonment. How did you recover? She asked, desperate to believe that healing was possible. Victor turned to her then, his gaze meeting hers with unflinching honesty. I didn't. Not completely. I buried myself in work, built an empire, achieved everything I thought would fill the void. He paused, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. But there are still nights when I wake up wondering what I could have done differently. The admission, so raw, so contrary to his public image, moved Amara deeply. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand finding his in the sand between them. Thank you, she whispered, for sharing that, for understanding. Victor's fingers intertwined with hers, the simple connection more intimate than any embrace. Perhaps we're both still healing, he said softly. But maybe we don't have to do it alone. As darkness settled around them, stars emerging in the velvet sky above, Amara felt something new taking root within her. Not love, not yet, but possibility, a chance for something authentic to grow from the ashes of her shattered plans. For the first time since Julian's betrayal, Amara found herself thinking not of what she had lost, but of what unexpected treasures tomorrow might bring. Chapter 4. Passionate Awakening. 3 days at Victor's Kiwa Island estate had transformed Amara in ways she hadn't thought possible. The constant ocean breeze and rhythmic waves had washed away the sharp edges of her pain, leaving behind something softer, more manageable. Each sunrise found her on the private beach, toes buried in cool sand as she greeted the day with newfound peace. Victor had given her space while somehow always being present when she needed him. Their conversations had grown deeper, punctuated by lingering glances and accidental touches that sent electricity coursing through her veins. Lila and Ethan had returned to the city yesterday, leaving Amara and Victor alone in the sprawling beach house, a fact that filled her with both anticipation and nervousness. This morning, Amara stood on her private balcony, watching as Victor swam powerful laps in the ocean, his muscular form cutting through the water with the same precision and determination he applied to everything else in his life. She couldn't deny her attraction to him any longer, an attraction that went far beyond his physical appeal or wealth. In these intimate days, she'd discovered the man beneath the public persona. Thoughtful, wounded in his own way, yet unfailingly kind. Beautiful view, isn't it? Amara startled at the deep voice behind her. She turned to find Victor standing in the doorway to her suite, hair still damp from his swim, a thin cotton shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. Heat rose to her cheeks at being caught watching him. I didn't hear you come up, she said, willing her heartbeat to slow. Victor moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough that she could smell the salt on his skin mixed with his subtle cologne. I promised you a proper tour of the island today. Still interested? She nodded, hyper-aware of his proximity. I'd love that. An hour later, they were cruising along coastal roads in Victor's convertible, the wind tugging playfully at Amara's curls. Victor drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the center console, inches from her own. She found herself wanting to bridge that small distance, to feel his fingers entwined with hers again, as they had been on the beach. You're thinking too loudly, Victor observed, glancing at her with a smile that made her stomach flip. Share. Amara hesitated, then decided on honesty. I was thinking how different this feels from anything I've experienced before. Different, how? He asked, his voice deepening slightly. With Julian, everything was planned, predictable. I always knew what came next. She watched the ocean glittering alongside the road. This, us, I can't predict where we're going. Victor's hand finally moved, covering hers with gentle warmth. Sometimes the most beautiful journeys have no maps. They spent the day exploring hidden corners of the island, a secluded lighthouse, a local market where Victor was greeted by name, and finally a quiet cove, accessible only by a narrow path through lush vegetation. My secret spot, Victor explained as they emerged onto pristine sand untouched by other footprints. I come here to think when the weight of decisions becomes too heavy. And you're sharing it with me? Amara asked, touched by the gesture. Victor's eyes, dark and intense, held hers. I find myself wanting to share everything with you, Amara. The simple statement hung between them, laden with meaning that made her breath catch. They settled on a blanket Victor had brought, sharing a picnic of local delicacies as the afternoon sun warmed their skin. With each passing moment, The invisible thread connecting them seemed to tighten, drawing them closer. "Your sister mentioned you've been coming here since childhood," Amara said, accepting the glass of wine Victor offered. A shadow crossed his face. "My mother used to clean houses on this island. She'd bring me along during summer breaks when childcare was too expensive." His fingers traced patterns in the sand. "I'd promise her that someday I'd buy her a house here. She died before I could—" Amara's heart constricted at the pain in his voice. Without thinking, she reached out, her palm against his cheek. "She'd be proud of you, Victor." He turned his face slightly, his lips brushing against her inner wrist in a touch so intimate that Amara felt it resonate through her entire body. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, all pretense fell away. "I've wanted to kiss you since the moment I saw you walking down that aisle," Victor confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Even then, in someone else's wedding, I couldn't take my eyes off you." Amara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were wounded," he said simply. "And I never want to be someone who exploits your vulnerability." The tenderness in his admission undid her final reservations. "And if I told you I'm not feeling vulnerable right now?" she whispered. "If I told you what I'm feeling is something else entirely?" Victor's hand came up to cradle her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. "Then I'd ask what you're feeling, Amara." "Desire," she breathed, the word barely audible above the rushing of the waves and her own thundering pulse. "For you." The last word had barely left her lips before Victor closed the distance between them, his mouth capturing hers with a passion that stole her breath. His kiss was nothing like Julian's practiced, predictable affection. Victor kissed her like a man who had been drowning and finally found air, desperate yet reverent. Amara melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to curl around his neck, pulling him closer. Victor's arms enveloped her, strong and sure, as he deepened the kiss with a groan that vibrated through her body. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, seeking entrance that she eagerly granted, and when they finally tasted each other, the sensation was so exquisite that Amara felt tears spring to her eyes. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I've imagined this more times than I can count," he admitted, his voice husky with want. "Reality is infinitely better." Amara's fingers traced the strong line of his jaw, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "How long?" she asked. "How long have you been watching me?" Victor captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that sent shivers racing down her spine. "Since Lila's wedding," he confessed. "You commanded that chaos with such grace, such fierce competence. I couldn't look away." "That was over a year ago," Amara whispered, astonished. 1 year, 3 months, and 17 days, Victor confirmed with a small smile. "I tried to find excuses to see you again. I even considered hosting unnecessary corporate events just to hire you." The revelation stunned her. "Why didn't you just ask me out?" "You were engaged," he reminded her softly. "I respected that, even while wishing things were different." His thumb caressed her cheekbone. "When I saw you in that chapel, standing tall despite your world crumbling, I knew I couldn't let another day pass without at least trying." Amara's heart swelled with emotion she couldn't yet name. She pulled him back to her, initiating a kiss that quickly blazed out of control. Victor's hands moved down her back, drawing her closer until she was practically in his lap. Her body pressed against the hard planes of his chest. "Amara," he murmured against her lips, his voice strained with restraint. "If we don't stop now." "Then don't stop," she whispered back, surprising herself with her boldness. "I don't want to think anymore. I just want to feel." Something fierce flashed in Victor's eyes before he claimed her mouth again, all restraint abandoned. His kisses trailed down her neck, finding sensitive spots that made her gasp and arch against him. Heat pooled low in her belly as his hands explored her body with reverent hunger, igniting sensations that Julian had never come close to awakening. But when Victor's fingers found the edge of her sundress, he paused, pulling back just enough to meet her gaze. "Not like this," he said, his voice rough with desire but eyes clear with determination. "Not here, not rushed. When I make love to you for the first time, it will be somewhere worthy of you." The promise in his words sent anticipation spiraling through Amara. This was nothing like the methodical progression of physical intimacy she'd experienced with Julian. This was wild, uncharted territory, desire in its purest form. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly gathered their things and returned to the car, the drive back to the estate charged with electricity, Victor's hand resting possessively on her thigh, Amara's fingers tracing patterns on his forearm. Night had fallen by the time they reached the house, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Victor led her through the dimly lit rooms to the oceanfront terrace, where someone, likely the discreet staff, had arranged flickering candles around a small table set for two. "I had hoped," Victor began, suddenly showing a hint of uncertainty that Amara found endearing. She silenced him with a gentle kiss. "It's perfect." They dined under the stars, conversation flowing between them, interspersed with heated glances and lingering touches. With each passing moment, Amara felt herself falling deeper into something both terrifying and exhilarating. It was too soon to call it love, too soon after Julian's betrayal, too soon after meeting Victor properly, yet it felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years of engagement. After dinner, Victor guided her to a cushioned swing overlooking the moonlit beach, his arm draping naturally around her shoulders as she curled against his side. "What happens when we return to the city?" Amara asked, voicing the question that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness. Victor's fingers traced delicate patterns on her bare shoulder. "Whatever we want to happen," he said simply. "I know what I want, Amara. I've known for longer than you can imagine." She tilted her face up to his, heart pounding. "And what is that?" "You," he said, the single word carrying the weight of promise, "in my life, in whatever way you'll allow." Before she could respond, his mouth found hers again, and this time, there was no holding back. The kiss deepened instantly, passion flaring between them with an intensity that left them both trembling. Victor's hands tangled in her hair as Amara pressed herself closer, silently communicating her need. When he finally pulled away, his breathing ragged, Victor stood and extended his hand to her, a question in the gesture that required no words. Amara placed her hand in his without hesitation, allowing him to guide her through the house toward the master suite. Standing in the doorway, moonlight spilling across the massive bed, Amara felt a moment of nervousness that quickly dissolved when Victor turned to her. His expression, one of absolute adoration. "We can stop at any time," he assured her, his hands gently framing her face. "There's no rush, no expectation." Amara rose on her tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in answer. "I don't want to stop," she whispered against his mouth. "I want you, Victor, all of you." With a groan that seemed torn from his very soul, Victor swept her into his arms, carrying her to the bed, as if she weighed nothing. As he laid her gently against the cool sheets, his body covering hers with protective heat, Amara knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened tomorrow or in the days to come, this night would forever mark the awakening of her heart to possibilities she had never dared imagine. Chapter 5. The Past Returns. 1 month after their passionate awakening at Kiwa Island, Amara and Victor had fallen into the comfortable rhythm of a couple deeply enamored with each other. Their relationship blossomed in the public eye, the abandoned bride and the millionaire CEO who had swept her off her feet, becoming the city's most captivating love story. Exclusive restaurants, charity galas, weekend escapes on Victor's jet. Amara's life had transformed beyond recognition. Yet beneath the glamour of their romance, something deeper had taken root. In quiet mornings sharing coffee on Victor's penthouse balcony. Evenings curled together discussing their childhoods. Amara discovered layers to Victor Langston that the business world never saw. The tender way he listened when she spoke of her mother's death, the vulnerable admission of his own childhood struggles, the passionate intensity with which he loved her, all revealed a man far more complex than the ruthless CEO portrayed in financial magazines. Tonight, Amara hummed softly as she arranged fresh lilies in Victor's penthouse, anticipating his return from a business trip to London. Her phone chimed with a message. Victor's plane had landed early, and he would be home within the hour. Her heart quickened at the thought of seeing him after 5 long days apart. The doorbell's unexpected ring startled her. Victor wouldn't ring his own bell, and the doorman always announced visitors. Cautiously, Amara approached the security panel, activating the camera to reveal a striking woman with familiar features that instantly caused her stomach to clench. Sophia Bennett, Julian's sister, stood in the hallway. Amara's first instinct was to ignore the unwelcome visitor, but curiosity overrode caution. She opened the door, maintaining a safe distance between them. "Hello, Amara," Sophia said, her voice softer than Amara remembered. "I apologize for coming unannounced, but it's important." Amara folded her arms across her chest. I have nothing to say to your family, Sophia. I understand. But please. Sophia hefted a leather messenger bag. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against her better judgment, Amara stepped aside, allowing Sophia into the foyer but no further. The penthouse was her sanctuary with Victor. She wouldn't allow Julian's family to taint it. Make it quick, she said. Victor will be home soon. Something flickered across Sophia's face at the mention of Victor, a reaction Amara couldn't quite decipher. I know you're happy with him, Sophia began, carefully extracting a manila envelope from her bag. The whole city's talking about your whirlwind romance. You didn't come here to discuss my relationship, Amara said firmly. What do you want? Sophia extended the envelope with a trembling hand. Julian wants you to have this. He needs you to understand why he left that day. The mere mention of her ex-fiancé's name ignited a flare of anger in Amara's chest. I don't care why he left. It was the best thing he ever did for me. Please, Sophia insisted. He was blackmailed, Amara. He didn't want to leave you. Amara snorted in disbelief but took the envelope, if only to end this conversation faster. Blackmailed? That's convenient. It's the truth, Sophia said, a hint of defensive fire entering her voice. There are people who wanted to destroy our family's company. They threatened to expose certain financial improprieties unless Julian walked away from the wedding. They wanted the embarrassment to be public, devastating. Amara's fingers tightened around the envelope, its contents suddenly weighted with unwelcome significance. Why tell me this now? It's been months. Because the threat has passed, Sophia explained. The investigation closed last week. Julian is free to explain everything. She paused, meeting Amara's gaze directly. He still loves you. He wants another chance. The absurdity of the situation struck Amara like a physical blow. She laughed. The sound brittle even to her own ears. You can't be serious. He knew you'd react this way, Sophia said, undeterred. That's why he provided proof. She gestured to the envelope. Everything's in there. The threatening emails, bank records, even police reports. Curiosity battled with self-preservation as Amara stared at the envelope. Part of her wanted to throw it unopened into Sophia's face, but another part, the event planner who valued details and clarity, needed to understand what had truly happened that day. Tell Julian I'll read it, she finally said, making no promises beyond that. Relief visibly washed over Sophia. That's all he's asking. She turned to leave but paused at the door. He's not the villain in this story, Amara, neither are you. Something meaningful flickered in her expression. Just make sure you know who is before you commit your heart. The cryptic parting shot left Amara unsettled as she closed the door behind Sophia. Alone again, she carried the envelope to the kitchen counter, staring at it as if it might explode if handled incorrectly. The penthouse's security system chimed, announcing Victor's arrival. Amara quickly slid the envelope beneath a cookbook, her heart racing with conflicting emotions. Victor appeared in the doorway moments later, his tired face lighting up at the sight of her. There's my girl, he said warmly, crossing the room to gather her into his arms. Amara melted into his embrace, breathing in his familiar scent, letting his presence calm her frayed nerves. As his lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of 5 days' longing, she pushed thoughts of Julian and Sophia's visit to the furthest corners of her mind. Later that night, as Victor slept beside her, Amara slipped quietly from bed and retrieved the envelope from its hiding place. In the dim light of the guest bathroom, she carefully examined its contents. Emails threatening to expose financial fraud within Bennett Industries, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and finally, a handwritten letter from Julian explaining his impossible choice. The evidence seemed genuine, the threat real. Julian hadn't abandoned her on a whim, but had been coerced into creating a public scandal to distract from the company's troubles. According to his letter, he had chosen to sacrifice their relationship rather than subject her to the legal nightmare that would have followed if the threats had been carried out. Amara sat on the cool tile floor, emotions churning inside her. The explanation answered questions that had haunted her for months, provided closure she hadn't realized she needed. Yet it also presented a new dilemma. Julian wanted another chance. 6 months ago, such a revelation might have thrown her into confusion. Now, as she pictured Julian's face in her mind, she felt only a distant echo of what they'd shared. When she thought of love, it was Victor's smile that appeared, Victor's touch she craved, Victor's future she wanted to build. She returned to bed, curling against Victor's sleeping form, his arm instinctively drawing her closer. As she drifted towards sleep, one detail from Sophia's visit nagged at the edges of her consciousness. The strange reaction when Victor's name was mentioned, the cryptic warning about knowing who the villain is. What had Sophia meant? Did she simply assume Victor was a rebound relationship, or was there something more significant behind her words? Morning brought dazzling sunshine and the aroma of fresh coffee. Amara found Victor in the kitchen, dressed casually in lounge pants and a t-shirt that highlighted his athletic build, preparing breakfast with the focus and efficiency he brought to everything. "You disappeared in the night," he observed, sliding a coffee mug toward her. "Couldn't sleep." Amara hesitated, weighing whether to mention Sophia's visit. Their relationship had been built on honesty and communication, but this felt different, like reopening a wound that had finally healed. "Julian's sister came by yesterday," she said simply, watching Victor's reaction carefully, "while you were on your way home." Victor's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their preparation of an omelet. His voice remained casual, though something in his posture had shifted. "What did she want?" To explain why Julian left me at the altar, Amara sipped her coffee, gauging his reaction. Apparently, he was blackmailed into creating a public scandal. Victor turned to face her fully, his expression concerned but not surprised. "Do you believe her?" "The evidence seems credible," Amara admitted. "But, more importantly, she said Julian wants another chance." The spatula in Victor's hand clattered against the counter. "And how do you feel about that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Amara rose from her stool, moving around the island to stand before him. She took his face between her palms, ensuring he could see the truth in her eyes. "I feel nothing for Julian anymore," she said firmly. "What we have, what you've shown me about love and partnership, it's beyond anything I experienced with him." Relief washed over Victor's features as he pulled her close. "I was afraid," he confessed against her hair. "For a moment, I thought I might lose you." "Never," Amara assured him, though she couldn't quite silence the nagging questions Sophia's visit had planted. But something about Sophia's visit felt strange. She reacted oddly when I mentioned your name, almost as if... "As if what?" Victor prompted when she trailed off. "As if you were somehow connected to what happened with Julian." Amara pulled back slightly to study his face. "Is there something I don't know about you and the Bennett family, Victor?" A shadow crossed his expression so quickly she might have imagined it. "Julian and I have crossed paths in business circles," he admitted. "There's some history there, but nothing significant to us." Before Amara could press further, Victor's phone rang, his chief financial officer calling about an urgent matter that required immediate attention. The moment passed, the questions set aside but not forgotten. As Victor kissed her apologetically before retreating to his home office, alone in the kitchen, Amara stared at the half-prepared breakfast, a vague uneasiness settling in her stomach. Victor's explanation made sense, yet something in his reaction suggested there might be more to the story than he was sharing. She shook her head, pushing away the doubt. After Julian's betrayal, it was natural to be wary, to look for signs of deception, but Victor had given her no reason to question his honesty or his love. That evening, Victor surprised her with tickets to a private gallery showing, a welcome distraction from the questions that had plagued her throughout the day. As they mingled with the city's elite, Amara couldn't help noticing how protectively Victor kept her close, his hand a constant presence at the small of her back, his gaze frequently seeking hers across crowded conversations. "You're unusually attentive tonight," she observed as they examined a large abstract canvas together. Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Just making sure everyone knows how much I adore you," he replied, but there was something beneath his casual tone, something that sounded almost like fear. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Victor caught her hands in his. "Move in with me," he said suddenly, "officially. No more split time between our places." The offer took Amara by surprise, not because she hadn't considered it, but because of its timing. "Where is this coming from?" Victor kissed her knuckles, his expression earnest. "I've been thinking about it for weeks. Life is too short for half measures, Amara. I want to fall asleep beside you every night and wake up with you every morning." Though touched by the sentiment, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that Sophia's visit had triggered this sudden urgency. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Julian wanting me back, would it?" "Perhaps it accelerated my timeline," Victor admitted. But the desire was already there. "Say yes, Amara. Make this home yours as much as it's mine." looking into his eyes that had never lied to her, that had shown her passion and tenderness she'd never known before. Amara couldn't deny her own desire for deeper commitment. Whatever shadows Sophia's visit had cast seemed insignificant compared to the light of their future together. "Yes," she said simply, laughing with joy as Victor lifted her in celebration, spinning her around before laying her gently on the bed they would now officially share. As they made love with an intensity that left them both breathless, Amara surrendered completely to the connection they shared. In Victor's arms, the past Julian, the abandoned wedding, the whispered rumor all faded to insignificance. What she couldn't know was that the past wasn't finished with them yet, and that Sophia's cryptic warning contained far more truth than she could have imagined. The foundations of trust upon which she and Victor had built their love would soon be tested in ways neither of them could anticipate, forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about each other and themselves. Chapter 6: Surrender to Love. The revelation that Julian had been blackmailed still lingered in Amara's mind as she paced the length of her apartment. 3 days had passed since Sophia, Julian's sister, had shown up at her office with an envelope full of evidence. Someone had threatened to reveal Julian's family's financial improprieties unless he walked away from the wedding. Even more shocking was Sophia's final comment before leaving. "He still loves you, Amara. He wants another chance." Amara paused by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass. Her phone buzzed for the 5th time. Victor calling again. She'd been avoiding him since Sophia's visit, needing space to process what felt like her past and present colliding. The doorbell rang. She knew who it was even before checking. "You can't avoid me forever," Victor said when she opened the door, rain glistening in his dark hair, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Talk to me, Amara." She stepped aside, allowing him into the apartment they'd spent so many evenings in together over the past weeks. The space still held evidence of their happiness. A bottle of his favorite scotch on her bar, a cashmere throw he draped around her shoulders one chilly evening, photographs from Kiwa Island magneted to her refrigerator. "Julian wants me back," she said plainly, watching Victor's face carefully. "Sophia said he was blackmailed into leaving me at the altar." Victor's jaw tightened momentarily before he deliberately relaxed it. "And how do you feel about that?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken fears. Amara moved to the window again, pressing her palm against the cool glass. "Confused," she admitted. 3 years with Julian, gone in an instant, and now this explanation that changes everything and nothing simultaneously. Victor remained still, giving her space even as she could feel his anxiety radiating across the room. "Do you still love him?" he asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely heard from him. The question forced Amara to examine her heart with brutal honesty. Did some part of her still cling to Julian, to the comfortable plans they'd made? She closed her eyes, conjuring Julian's face in her mind, and felt nothing but distant affection, like a photograph faded with time. Then she thought of Victor. The way his smile transformed his entire face, how his touch awakened every nerve ending in her body, the safety she felt in his arms. The difference was startling in its clarity. "No," she said finally, turning to face him. "Whatever I felt for Julian has been overshadowed by what I feel for you." Relief washed over Victor's features as he crossed the room in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. "I've been terrified of losing you," he confessed. "These past days without you have been torture." "I needed to be certain," Amara explained, squeezing his hands. "What we have happened so quickly, after such heartbreak. I had to know it was real, and not just a reaction to pain." Victor's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her lips. "And what did you discover?" Amara closed her eyes, reflecting on the days she'd spent wrestling with her feelings. She'd analyzed every moment with Julian, searching for the same depth she felt with Victor. She'd questioned whether she was simply running from heartbreak into the arms of safety, but each examination had led to the same conclusion. "I discovered that what I had with Julian was comfortable and familiar," she said softly, opening her eyes to meet Victor's anxious gaze. "But what I feel for you, it awakens parts of me I never knew existed. It's not about escaping pain, it's about finding something truer than I ever thought possible." She leaned into his touch, the simple contact sending warmth cascading through her. "What I feel for you is more real than anything I've ever known, that when I imagine my future, it's your face I see beside me, not his." The tension in Victor's body released as he pulled her against him, his arms encircling her with protective tenderness. "I've never been so scared," he whispered against her hair, the thought of you returning to him. Amara pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. There's no going back for me, Victor. Only forward. With you. His kiss was gentle at first, relieved and reverent, but quickly blazed into something more desperate as days of separation and worry ignited between them. Amara's hand slid beneath his rain-dampened shirt, craving the feel of his skin against her palms. I need you, she breathed against his mouth, all hesitation evaporating in the heat of their shared desire. Victor lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the bedroom they'd shared so many passionate nights in. This time felt different, a conscious choice rather than an irresistible pull. As he laid her gently on the bed, his eyes never leaving hers, Amara knew she was surrendering not just her body but every fragment of her heart. I love you, Victor whispered as he covered her body with his, the words flowing naturally, inevitably between them for the first time. Amara's breath caught at the declaration, so simply stated yet carrying the weight of absolute certainty. I love you too, she replied, the truth of it resonating through her entire being. Their lovemaking that night was unhurried, each touch an affirmation, each kiss a promise. Victor worshipped her body with tender devotion, drawing responses from her that left her breathless and trembling. When they finally joined, moving together in perfect rhythm, Amara felt tears spring to her eyes at the overwhelming completeness of their connection. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets in each other, Victor traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Come away with me, he murmured against her temple. Back to Kiwa? She asked, nestling closer into his warmth. Farther, he said. Italy, the Amalfi Coast. I have a villa there that I've never shared with anyone. Amara propped herself up on one elbow, studying his earnest expression. You want me to go to Italy with you? Victor nodded, his fingers threading through her curls. For a month? I've already arranged to work remotely. You could do the same with your business. The impulsiveness of it thrilled her, so different from her carefully structured life with Julian. A month in Italy, she repeated, imagining sun-drenched mornings and passionate nights beneath Mediterranean stars. Say yes, Victor urged, pulling her closer. Let me show you places I've only dreamed of sharing with someone I love. The word love still felt new on their lips, precious and powerful. Amara kissed him deeply, her answer clear in the urgent press of her body against his. Yes, she whispered when they broke apart. Take me anywhere, as long as we're together. 3 days later, they were soaring over the Atlantic in Victor's private jet, the uncertain past left firmly behind them. As the Italian coastline came into view, sapphire waters and pastel buildings clinging to dramatic cliffs, Amara felt a profound sense of brightness settle in her chest. The villa exceeded every expectation. A centuries old structure updated with modern luxuries, perched high above the sea with breathtaking views from every window. Their days fell into a blissful rhythm of exploration and discovery, both of the picturesque villages along the coast and of each other. On their final evening in Italy, Victor led her through the villa's lush gardens to a secluded terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. Candles flickered in the gentle breeze, casting golden light across a table set for an intimate dinner. A bottle of champagne chilled in a silver bucket, crystal glasses catching the dying sunlight. This feels like a celebration, Amara observed as Victor pulled out her chair. It is, he confirmed, his smile containing a hint of mystery that made her pulse quicken. They dined on local delicacies prepared by the villa's chef, the conversation flowing easily between them, as it always did. As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one above them, Victor reached across the table to take her hand. These weeks with you have been the happiest of my life, he said, his thumb caressing her knuckles. You've shown me what it means to truly share myself with someone. Amara's heart swelled with emotion. You've given me a love I never knew was possible, she replied. When Julian left me at that altar, I thought my world had ended. Now I understand it was just beginning. Victor's eyes, always expressive, shone with an intensity that took her breath away. I want to continue that beginning, he said softly, reaching into his pocket. Together, when he rose from his chair to kneel before her, a small velvet box in his hand, Amara felt tears spring to her eyes. This isn't a proposal, he clarified, opening the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. Not yet. It's a promise that, when you're ready, truly ready, I'll be waiting to make you my wife. Amara looked from the exquisite ring to the equally beautiful man offering it, overwhelmed by the consideration in his gesture. Most men would have rushed straight to a proposal, but Victor understood her need for time, for healing fully before beginning anew. "It's perfect," she whispered as he slipped the ring onto her right hand. A promise rather than an engagement. As Victor gathered her into his arms beneath the Italian stars, Amara marveled at how completely her heart had surrendered to this unexpected love. What had begun in the ashes of heartbreak had transformed into something so profound, so consuming, that she could no longer imagine life without Victor Langston by her side. She had been left devastated at the altar, only to discover that sometimes shattered dreams make space for greater ones to take root. And as Victor's lips found hers in a kiss that spoke of forever, Amara knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true destiny in the arms of the man who had loved her from afar long before she even knew his heart. Chapter 7. Family Tensions. Langston Estate sprawled across 5 manicured acres in the most exclusive neighborhood of the city. As Victor's Bentley passed through the ornate iron gates, Amara felt her stomach tighten with nerves. After 6 blissful months together, including their transformative Italian getaway, this would be her first meeting with Victor's extended family at his mother's memorial dinner. "You're quiet," Victor observed, reaching across the console to take her hand. The sapphire promise ring gleamed on her right hand, catching the afternoon sunlight. "Just processing," Amara admitted. "Meeting your family at such an important gathering feels significant." Victor's thumb traced soothing circles on her palm. "They'll love you," he assured her, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced himself. "Your sister already does," Amara reminded him with a smile. Lila had become a dear friend over the past months, their bond extending beyond Victor's connection to both women. "Lila sees people for who they truly are," Victor said, his jaw tightening slightly. "Others in my family are more traditional." The car came to a stop before an imposing colonial mansion. Before the driver could open their door, Victor turned to Amara, his expression suddenly vulnerable. "My family can be difficult," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tonight, remember that you're the woman I love. Nothing they say or do changes that." A warning chill ran down Amara's spine, but she leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to his lips. "We've faced worse than disapproving relatives, haven't we?" Victor's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's hope that's true." The grand foyer buzzed with conversation and the subtle notes of classical music. Amara felt the immediate shift in atmosphere as Victor guided her through the crowd, his hand protective at the small of her back. Conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes lingered a beat too long, whispers followed in their wake. Lila rushed forward, embracing Amara warmly. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. "Aunt Beatrice is on her 3rd martini, and Uncle Theodore is cornering everyone about tax brackets." Victor laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders at his sister's familiar humor. "Where's Ethan?" "Hiding in the library," Lila replied with a conspiratorial wink. "Smart man, my husband." An elegant older woman approached, her silver hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her spine rigid as a steel rod despite her advanced years. "Victor," she greeted, offering her cheek for a dutiful kiss. "You're late." "Traffic, Aunt Beatrice," Victor replied smoothly. "May I introduce Amara Elise?" "Amara, my aunt, Beatrice Langston." Amara extended her hand with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Langston. Victor speaks of you often." Beatrice assessed Amara with a clinical gaze, her eyes flickering from Amara's face down to her hand, then back up again. The calculated dismissal was evident as she deliberately overlooked the extended hand. "Does he? How fascinating." Her attention pivoted sharply back to Victor. "Your uncle would like a word about the Singapore acquisition before dinner." As she glided away without further acknowledgement of Amara, Victor's expression hardened. "I apologize for my aunt," he said tightly. "It's fine," Amara assured him, though the deliberate slight had stung more than she wanted to admit. Really. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions, each more strained than the last. Victor's cousins regarded her with barely disguised curiosity, while their spouses offered practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. The only genuine warmth came from Lila and her husband, Ethan, who hovered nearby like protective allies. "Is that the wedding planner?" The loudly whispered question reached Amara as she returned from the powder room. 2 women she'd been introduced to earlier, both married to Victor's cousins, stood by a potted palm, cocktails in hand. Can you imagine? From planning weddings to sleeping her way into one of the country's largest fortunes. The second woman replied. her voice dripping with disdain. She certainly didn't waste time after being jilted. Victor's always been blind when it comes to women, the first woman continued. Remember that Brazilian model? But at least she had connections. This one's ambitious. The second woman finished with a meaningful look. Beatrice says her kind always are. Her kind? The words escaped Amara's lips before she could stop them, causing both women to whirl around, faces flushing with the shame of being caught rather than remorse for their words. We didn't see you there, the taller one stammered, clutching her pearl necklace. Amara straightened her spine, channeling the composure that had carried her through countless high-pressure events. Clearly, she said, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her veins. Tell me, what exactly is my kind? Wedding planners? Women who've been left at the altar? Or was there another characteristic you were referring to? The challenge hung in the air between them, the unspoken bigotry exposed for what it was. Before either woman could respond, a hand slipped around Amara's waist. Lila, her expression fierce despite her sweet features. There you are, she said brightly to Amara, while shooting a glacial look at the two gossips. Victor's looking for you. Dinner's about to be served. As Lila led her away, Amara fought to maintain her composure. How much of that did you hear? She asked quietly. Enough, Lila replied grimly. I'm so sorry, Amara. Some branches of our family tree should have been pruned generations ago. At the dining table, Amara found herself seated between Victor and a distinguished older gentleman introduced as his father's former business partner. Victor's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing gently in silent support. I must say, the elderly man began after introductions. You're not at all what I expected when I heard Victor had finally found someone special. Amara braced herself for another subtle barb, but the man's eyes twinkled with genuine warmth. You're far more impressive, he continued. I've heard about your business acumen from Victor. Building a luxury event planning company from scratch takes remarkable vision. Relief and gratitude washed over Amara. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. It hasn't been without challenges. The best journeys never are, he replied, raising his glass in a subtle toast. As the elegant five-course meal progressed, Amara became increasingly aware of Beatrice's sharp gaze upon her. When dessert was served, the older woman finally addressed her directly from across the table. Tell me, Miss Elise, she began, her voice slicing through the subdued conversations like a scalpel. What exactly are your intentions with my nephew? A hush fell over the table. Victor stiffened beside her, but before he could intercede, Amara placed a calming hand on his arm. My intentions, she repeated, meeting the older woman's frost-laden stare with quiet dignity. To love him completely, support him unconditionally, and build a life of mutual respect and joy together. She paused, then added with gentle firmness, the same intentions, I believe, your sister, Victor's mother, would have wanted for her son. Beatrice flinched slightly at the mention of her late sister, her composed mask slipping momentarily. Something resembling grudging respect flickered briefly across her features, a reluctant acknowledgement of the emotional courage behind Amara's words. Victor's uncle, Theodore, a silver-haired man with shrewd eyes, leaned forward. Admirable sentiments, he said, his tone suggesting the opposite, though one wonders if love is sufficient foundation for joining one of the country's oldest business dynasties. The Langston name carries certain expectations. Uncle, Victor warned, his voice low but edged with steel. It's a fair question, Theodore pressed. Your position requires a partner familiar with our world, our traditions. Miss Elise's background is considerably different. My background, Amara interjected calmly, taught me values that transcend social circles or bank accounts. Integrity, hard work, loyalty. She met Theodore's gaze steadily. I built my business by understanding people's deepest wishes and bringing them to life with excellence. A skill set not entirely different from what Victor does in his corporate realm. An approving murmur rippled from several guests, but Beatrice was not finished. Pretty words, she said dismissively. But let's be direct, shall we? The Langstons have carefully cultivated connections for generations. Marriage has always been an alliance of equals in this family. Enough. Victor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood, napkin placed deliberately beside his barely touched dessert. I've respected this family's traditions my entire life, but I will not sit here and allow the woman I love to be insulted under the guise of concern. His gaze swept the table, landing finally on his aunt. My mother would be ashamed of this display, Beatrice. The older woman flinched visibly at the rebuke. Victor continued, his hand finding Amara's shoulder in a gesture both protective and proud. Amara has shown more grace, intelligence, and genuine strength in the past 6 months than I've witnessed from some of you in decades. She doesn't need the Langston name. I'm the one honored by her presence in my life. Pride swelled in Amara's chest as she looked up at the man defending her with such unwavering conviction. Without a word, she rose to stand beside him, her fingers intertwining with his in silent solidarity. If anyone has further concerns about our relationship, Victor concluded, they can address them to me privately. Otherwise, I suggest we remember why we gathered tonight, to honor my mother's memory. The reminder of the evening's purpose subdued even Beatrice, who nodded stiffly before signaling for the servers to clear the dessert plates. As the gathering gradually dispersed into smaller groups for after-dinner drinks, Victor led Amara to a quiet alcove near the library. I'm sorry, he murmured, drawing her into his arms. I should have prepared you better. Amara shook her head, her hands coming up to frame his face. You have nothing to apologize for. Their behavior isn't your responsibility. Victor's expression was troubled as he captured her hands, pressing a kiss to each palm. But it is. I brought you into this snake pit, knowing exactly what might happen. I'm stronger than they think, Amara reminded him gently. Black women usually are. A muscle worked in Victor's jaw as he processed her words. You shouldn't have to be strong in the face of such thinly veiled racism and elitism, not in my family. It's hardly unique to your family, Amara said with a pragmatic shrug. What matters is how you respond to it. And, Victor Langston. She stretched up to brush her lips against his. You responded magnificently. The tension gradually eased from his shoulders as he pulled her closer. Have I told you today that I love you? He murmured against her hair. Yes, but I never tire of hearing it, she replied, nestling into his embrace. Their moment of connection was interrupted by approaching footsteps. They turned to find Lila, accompanied by an older man Amara recognized as Malcolm Taylor, Victor's mentor and the former CEO of Langston Technologies. Victor, Malcolm greeted warmly, and Miss Elise, a pleasure to finally meet the woman who's brought such light to this young man's eyes. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine beneath a distinguished salt and pepper beard. Likewise, Mr. Taylor, Amara replied, instantly comfortable in the older man's presence. Malcolm, please. He turned to Victor. Might I borrow your lovely partner for a moment? There's someone in the conservatory quite eager to meet her. Victor hesitated, protective instincts clearly on alert after the dinner confrontation. Who? Malcolm's eyes twinkled. My wife, Evelyn. She's been watching from afar, and declared Miss Elise exactly what this family needs to shake off its cobwebs. Her words, not mine. Relief and amusement crossed Victor's face. Evelyn always did have impeccable judgment. As Malcolm led Amara toward the conservatory, she glanced back at Victor, who mouthed, I love you, with such transparent emotion that her heart swelled anew. Whatever obstacles his family might place in their path, the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand any storm. Evelyn Taylor proved to be a delightful revelation. A vivacious woman in her 70s who embraced Amara like a long-lost friend and promptly introduced her to a circle of the family's more progressive members. By the time Victor found her an hour later, Amara was comfortably ensconced in conversation with his cousins from the West Coast branch, the black sheep of the family, as they jokingly called themselves. Stealing my girlfriend, Aunt Evelyn? Victor teased as he joined their group. The older woman patted his cheek affectionately, simply making sure she knows not all Langstons are fossilized relics. Dear boy. As the evening drew to a close, several family members who had initially been standoffish approached to say goodbye, their manner noticeably warmer after witnessing both Victor's unwavering support and Amara's graceful handling of the dinner confrontation. In the car returning to Victor's penthouse, Amara finally allowed herself to exhale fully, kicking off her heels and curling against his side. That was intense, she admitted. Victor's arm tightened around her shoulders. You were magnificent, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. I've never been prouder to have you by my side. Even when your Aunt Beatrice looked like she might spontaneously combust? Amara asked with a tired smile. Especially then, Victor confirmed, a hint of mischief lightening his serious features. Though I suspect we've only seen the opening salvo. Beatrice Langston doesn't retreat. She merely regroups. Amara sighed. the reality of their situation settling over her like a heavy cloak. Will it always be this way with your family, this resistance? Victor was silent for a long moment, his fingers absently stroking her arm. Not all of them, he finally said. You saw that tonight. And the others. He tilted her chin up, his gaze intense in the dim light of the car. The others will come around, or they'll lose their place in our lives. You are not a negotiable part of my future, Amara Elise. The certainty in his voice washed away the lingering sting of the evening's confrontations. As the city lights blurred past the car windows, Amara rested her head against Victor's shoulder, secure in the knowledge that they had faced the first real test of their relationship and emerged stronger for it. What she couldn't know was that a far greater challenge loomed on the horizon, one that would test not just their ability to stand united against external opposition, but the very foundation of trust upon which they had built their love. Chapter 8. Hidden Truth. Rain lashed against the windows of Victor's penthouse, mirroring the turbulent mood that had descended over what should have been a celebratory evening. Amara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching lightning illuminate the cityscape as she tried to process the document that had turned her world upside down once again. How long have you known? She asked, her voice barely audible above the storm raging outside. Behind her, Victor remained frozen in place, his reflection in the glass revealing a man caught between worlds, the confident CEO momentarily stripped away, leaving only raw vulnerability. Amara, please let me explain. She turned slowly, the manila folder still clutched in her hand. Inside was irrefutable evidence that Victor had been investigating Julian's business dealings months before her wedding, long before he'd ever officially met her. More damning were the dated surveillance reports indicating Victor had known about Julian's intention to abandon her at the altar at least 3 days before it happened. You knew, she whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper with each passing second. You knew he wasn't going to show up, and you said nothing. Victor took a step toward her, then stopped when she instinctively backed away. It wasn't that simple, he said, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of agitation. You have to understand the position I was in. The position you were in, Amara repeated incredulously. I was humiliated in front of 200 people. I stood in that chapel like a fool while you sat there, watching, knowing exactly what was happening. The realization struck her anew. Oh my God, that's why you were at the wedding. You weren't there as Lila's brother. You were there waiting for the disaster you knew was coming. No, Victor's denial was immediate and fierce. I was there because I couldn't stay away, because even though we'd only met briefly at Lila's wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Amara shook her head, unwilling to be swayed by words that once would have melted her resistance. Then explain these, she demanded, pulling out the surveillance reports. Explain why your security team was tracking Julian's movements. Why there are notes about his meeting with his lawyer the day before our wedding. Explain why you didn't warn me. Victor set down his glass with deliberate care. It's complicated, he said after taking a long swallow. Uncomplicate it, Amara countered, folding her arms across her chest. Victor sat down. Julian's company, Bennett Industries, was attempting to acquire a technology startup that had developed encryption software with potential national security implications. My cybersecurity division had been tracking the situation for months because we had concerns about Bennett's international connections. What does that have to do with my wedding? Amara interrupted, impatience edging her voice. I'm getting there, Victor said, his tone gentle despite the tension crackling between them. During our investigation, we discovered Julian was being pressured by foreign investors with questionable ties. They wanted him to expedite the acquisition using methods that crossed ethical and legal boundaries. Amara's mind raced back to Sophia's revelation about Julian being blackmailed. The blackmail, she murmured. Victor nodded grimly. Partly, yes, but it was more complicated than Sophia told you. Julian wasn't just a victim. He was in too deep with some very dangerous people. When he tried to back out, they threatened to expose not only his financial improprieties but his family's as well. And leaving me at the altar was part of their demand? Amara asked, disbelief coloring her words. No, Victor admitted, and something in his expression made Amara's stomach clench with dread. That was his attempted solution. Julian believed that if he created a public spectacle, something scandalous enough to dominate local business news, it would distract from the acquisition deal falling apart the following Monday. He calculated that your humiliation would buy him time to navigate the fallout. The truth landed like a physical blow. Amara sank onto the nearest chair, the document slipping from her suddenly nerveless fingers. All this time, she'd allowed herself to believe that Julian had been forced to leave her, that he'd had no choice. The reality that he had deliberately sacrificed her dignity to save his own skin was almost too painful to comprehend. "If that's true," she said when she could finally speak again, "then why didn't you warn me? Why let me go through with a wedding you knew was doomed?" Victor crossed the room to kneel before her, though he was careful not to touch her. "I tried," he said quietly. "2 days before the wedding, I arranged to meet with you under the guise of discussing a potential corporate event. You had to cancel because of last-minute wedding details." Amara vaguely remembered the scheduled meeting. Victor Langston requesting her services for a charity gala. She'd been so overwhelmed with final arrangements that she'd asked her assistant to reschedule for after her honeymoon. "One cancelled meeting doesn't absolve you," she pointed out. "You could have called, sent an email, shown up at my office." "With what evidence?" Victor countered, frustration edging his voice. "Everything we had was part of an ongoing, confidential investigation. If I had approached you with vague warnings or unsubstantiated claims, would you have believed me, a man you barely knew, making accusations against the man you were about to marry?" The question hung between them, uncomfortable in its logic. Would she have believed Victor, or would she have dismissed his warnings as the ramblings of a jealous competitor of Julian's? "You still should have tried harder," Amara insisted, although her certainty was beginning to waver. "Instead, you let me walk into that chapel completely unprepared." Victor rose, moving to retrieve something from his desk drawer. "I did try," he said, returning with a sealed envelope that he placed in her hands. "This was delivered to your office the morning of your wedding. It contained enough information to make you question Julian without compromising the investigation." Amara stared at the envelope, addressed in Victor's distinctive handwriting. "I never received this." "Because Julian's assistant intercepted it," Victor explained, the muscle in his jaw working as he controlled his anger. "She was on his payroll to monitor all your communications that week. They couldn't risk anyone warning you." Amara's mind raced back to that morning. Julian's assistant, Clara, unexpectedly showing up at her office with a forgotten wedding detail, insisting on handling the mail while Amara finished her makeup. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far more calculated than a simple case of cold feet. "Even if that's true," she said, still struggling to reconcile this new reality, "it doesn't explain why you were there at the wedding." Victor's expression softened, vulnerability shining through his usually guarded demeanor. "Because I couldn't stay away," he admitted quietly. "Because, despite knowing what was likely to happen, I couldn't bear the thought of you facing it alone. I told myself I was there for closure, to finally stop thinking about the beautiful wedding planner who had captured my attention at Lila's wedding. But, in truth, I was there because some part of me hoped I was wrong, that Julian would prove me wrong and make you happy." The raw honesty in his voice threatened to unravel Amara's righteous anger. She stood abruptly, needing physical distance to maintain emotional clarity. "When did you plan to tell me all this? Or were you hoping I'd never find out?" "I was waiting for the federal investigation to conclude," Victor said. "The documents were sealed until yesterday. The Justice Department finally closed the case." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "I was going to tell you everything tonight." He gestured to the dining table, set for an intimate dinner with candles that had burned down to stubs during their confrontation. "That's why I planned this evening." Amara glanced at the abandoned tablescape, remembering how excited she'd been just hours ago, believing they were celebrating the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting. The irony tasted bitter on her tongue. "So this whole relationship," she said slowly, piecing together the timeline in her mind, "it started because you felt guilty about my wedding. What was I to you, Victor? A responsibility, a chance to make amends?" No, Victor's denial was immediate and fierce as he closed the distance between them, his hands gently grasping her upper arms. "Amara, look at me." When she finally met his gaze, the emotion there nearly undid her. "Did I feel responsible? Yes. Did I approach you that day partly from guilt? Perhaps. But everything that happened afterward, every moment, every touch, every word between us that was real, is real." Amara wanted desperately to believe him, but doubt had taken root, casting shadows over memories she had cherished. "How can I know that? How can I trust anything when our entire relationship was built on a foundation of secrets?" Victor's hands fell away from her arms, his expression reflecting the pain of her words. Our relationship wasn't built on secrets, Amara. It was built on the connection we share, on respect and understanding, and, eventually, love. The circumstances that brought us together may be complicated, but what grew between us is the simplest, truest thing I've ever known. For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the rain providing a melancholy soundtrack to the impasse between them. Amara felt torn between her instinctive trust in the man she'd come to love and the undeniable betrayal of his silence. "I need time," she finally said, moving to gather her purse and jacket. "I can't process all of this right now." Victor didn't try to stop her as she headed for the door, though the anguish in his eyes spoke volumes. "Amara," he called softly as her hand touched the doorknob, "there's one more thing you should know." She paused, not turning around. "What?" "The day of your wedding, when I found you alone in that chapel," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion, "I made a choice that cost me everything I'd been working toward." That made her turn. "What do you mean?" Victor met her questioning gaze steadily. "The merger I'd been negotiating for 2 years, the deal that would have expanded Langston Technologies into Asia, walked away from it that afternoon. The key investors were connected to the same people pressuring Julian. After seeing what they were willing to do to you, an innocent bystander, I couldn't, in good conscience, enter into business with them, regardless of the profit potential." Amara stared at him, trying to reconcile this revelation with her anger. "You sacrificed a merger worth billions," Victor supplied softly. "But I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat." "Some prices are too high, Amara, even for a businessman like me." The magnitude of his decision rendered her momentarily speechless. Victor Langston, notorious for his shrewd business acumen, had walked away from the deal of a lifetime because of his moral compass. Because of her. "I need to go," she whispered, suddenly overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling within her. "Please don't follow me." Victor nodded once, respecting her request, despite the evident cost to him. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But, please, when you're ready, come back so we can talk. Whatever you decide afterward, I'll accept." As Amara stepped into the private elevator, the doors closing on Victor's solitary figure framed against the storm-lashed windows, she felt the weight of this revelation pressing against her chest. Yet, beneath the pain of betrayal, she recognized this wasn't the same shattering she'd experienced with Julian. This time, she wasn't simply a victim of circumstance, but a woman with agency and power to decide what came next. The truth had finally emerged, complicating rather than clarifying the intricate tapestry of their relationship. But, unlike her wedding day a year ago, Amara faced this challenge with hard-won wisdom and self-assurance. The question wasn't whether she would survive this, she knew she would, but whether what they had built deserved the chance to evolve into something stronger, more honest, and ultimately more enduring than either of them had imagined possible. Chapter 9. Fighting for Love. For 3 days, Amara's world had narrowed to the confines of her apartment. Her phone silenced as Victor's calls went unanswered. The betrayal cut deeper than Julian's abandonment. Victor had known, had watched her walk into humiliation without warning her. On the 4th morning, she arrived at her office to find it transformed into a fragrant garden of memories, white orchids from their first night, bougainvillea from Italy, and cherry blossoms from their weekend in D.C. Each arrangement carried a card in Victor's handwriting, detailing the memory it represented. The final bouquet blue forget-me-not shelled, only an address and time. 8:00 p.m. Tonight, please come. Despite her better judgment, Amara found herself standing before St. Augustine's Chapel that evening, the very place where her wedding to Julian had dissolved into public spectacle. Inside, hundreds of candles illuminated a path lined not with pews but with photographs chronicling her relationship with Victor. Each image captured a moment they'd shared sailing off Kiwa Island, dancing under Italian stars, quiet mornings wrapped in each other's arms. At the altar stood Victor, wearing simple dark slacks and a white shirt, vulnerability etched across his face. Behind him stood Malcolm and Lila, silent witnesses to this moment. "Why here?" Amara asked, her voice barely steady. "Why bring me back to this place?" "Because this is where your heart was broken," Victor answered simply, "and it should be where I fight for us with everything I have." He gestured to a leather portfolio Malcolm held. "Inside is every document related to Julian, the investigation, and the failed merger. No more secrets, Amara. Every question you have, I'll answer with complete honesty." Amara understood the magnitude of what he offered. Many documents protected by confidentiality agreements that could expose him to legal consequences. "You'd risk this much," she whispered. "I'd risk everything for you," Victor replied without hesitation. "My company, my reputation, none of it means anything without you." His raw sincerity pierced through her defenses. "Before I look at these, tell me why you didn't warn me about Julian, not as a CEO or investigator, just as the man I fell in love with." Victor's composure cracked. "I was afraid," he confessed. "At first, I thought any revelation would seem opportunistic when you were vulnerable. Then I fell in love with you, completely, unexpectedly, and the thought of losing you became terrifying." He withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. "That night, before you found the documents, I had planned to tell you everything, ask your forgiveness, and then—" He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond ring. "Ask you to be my wife." Amara's breath caught as she stared at the ring, not just any ring, but one identical to the vintage piece her grandmother had worn, lost years ago, in a home robbery. "I found the original design in your grandmother's wedding photo album when we visited your father," Victor explained softly. "I had it recreated, stone by stone." Amara felt tears welling in her eyes. "You recreated my grandmother's ring." "Because I know what family means to you," Victor said, his voice breaking slightly. "And I want to build one with you, based on complete truth." He knelt before her, not in the practiced gesture of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, but with the genuine humility of someone risking everything. "I made a terrible mistake in not telling you sooner," he said, looking up at her. "I have no excuse, except that I was afraid of losing the greatest love I've ever known. But I'd rather lose you, knowing you had all the truth, than keep you through deception." He didn't offer the ring yet, didn't ask the question hanging between them. Instead, he simply said, "I love you, Amara Elise. With all my flaws and mistakes, I love you completely. Whatever you decide, that will never change." Amara stood at a crossroads, weighing the pain of his deception against the year of joy they'd shared. She thought of how he'd stood beside her against his family's prejudice, how he'd sacrificed a billion-dollar merger rather than align with those who'd hurt her, how he'd consistently shown through actions what truly mattered to him. "Stand up," she whispered, reaching for his hands. When he rose to face her, she saw naked hope and fear battling in his eyes. "You should have told me," she said firmly, "and it will take time to rebuild the trust that's been damaged." Victor nodded, accepting her terms without protest. "These past 3 days, I've thought about nothing else," she admitted. "I've replayed every moment we've shared, every conversation, searching for signs of deception. And, yes, I found the omission, this massive, important thing you kept from me." She took a deep breath, her decision, the result of hours of soul-searching and tearful introspection. "But in those same memories, I found countless moments of truth between us. Real connection, genuine love." She continued, her voice softening. "When I imagine my life without you in it," her voice caught. "I can't see it anymore, Victor. I don't want to." Relief and love flooded his expression as she stepped closer. "I love you," she said simply. "Enough to fight for us, enough to work through this. But no more secrets, ever. Never again," he vowed, drawing her into his arms. "Everything I am is yours, the good and the flawed." As their lips met in a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and new beginnings, Amara knew they faced a challenging road ahead, but standing in the very place where one dream had shattered, she found herself embracing a new one, built not on perfect illusions but on the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of true love. 6 months after their reconciliation at St. Augustine's Chapel, Amara stood on the private beach of Victor's Kiwa Island estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The gentle rhythm of waves washing against the shore mirrored the steady beating of her heart as she contemplated how far they had come. The path back to trust hadn't been easy. There had been difficult conversations, moments of doubt, even a brief separation when the weight of Victor's deception had momentarily overwhelmed their progress. Through it all, Victor had remained steadfast, meeting her anger with patience, her questions with unflinching honesty, her fears with consistent reassurance. "Penny for your thoughts," Victor's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar. Amara turned to face the man who had fought so hard for their love. He looked relaxed in linen pants and a loose white shirt, the corporate titan, giving way to simply Victor, her partner, her best friend, the keeper of her heart. Just thinking about us, she replied, accepting his embrace. How different tonight feels from the first time we stood on this beach together. Victor's arms tightened around her waist. Regrets? He asked softly, a hint of vulnerability lingering in his question despite all they had overcome. Not one, Amara assured him, rising on tiptoes to brush her lips against his. Every step, even the painful ones, led us here. Victor smiled against her mouth. And here is exactly where I want to be. They walked hand in hand along the shoreline as dusk deepened around them. When they reached the secluded cove where they had first kissed, Amara gasped in delight. Hundreds of candles illuminated the space, their flames protected from the ocean breeze by glass lanterns. White orchids and plumeria blooms created a natural altar near the water's edge. Victor, she breathed, taking in the magical setting. What is all this? Instead of answering, he guided her to the center of the candlelit sanctuary. Only then did Amara notice they weren't alone. Her father stood nearby, beaming with pride, alongside Lila and Ethan. Even Aunt Evelyn and Malcolm had made the journey, their presence a testament to the family bonds that had strengthened over time. I asked you once if you wanted a big wedding someday to replace the one you lost, Victor said, taking both her hands in his. You said what mattered wasn't the ceremony but finding someone who would love you completely, who would choose you every day. Amara's heart thundered as Victor continued, his voice steady yet tender. I've spent these past months trying to be that man, imperfect but honest, flawed but faithful. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing the emerald-cut diamond ring she'd declined 6 months earlier, waiting until she was truly ready. Tonight, in this place where we first acknowledged what was growing between us, I'm asking if you'll marry me, Amara Elise. Not tomorrow or next month, but right now, with just these few people who love us most. Tears of joy spilled down Amara's cheeks as the pieces fell into place. The intimate gathering, the makeshift altar, her father's presence. You planned a wedding, she whispered in wonder. A real beginning, Victor corrected gently. No spectacle, no society expectations, no ghosts from the past. Just us making promises we both choose with our whole hearts. Through her tears, Amara found herself laughing with pure happiness. Yes, she said, squeezing his hands tightly. Yes to marrying you right now. Yes to building a life together. Yes to everything. Victor's face transformed with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit in every way. From somewhere nearby, soft music began to play, and Amara's father stepped forward to take her arm. He asked for my blessing last month, he confided with a wink, said he wanted to do things properly this time around. The simple ceremony that followed contained no elaborate vows or traditional rituals. Instead, Victor and Amara spoke from their hearts, acknowledging both the beauty and challenges of their journey. I promise to love you without condition or reservation, Victor vowed, his voice carrying across the gentle surf behind them, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to honor your strength and support your dreams. I promise to remember that love isn't just a feeling but a choice I make every morning when I wake beside you. When it was Amara's turn, she found herself overwhelmed by emotion, yet the words came naturally. I promise to love you with open eyes and an open heart, to see you fully and love you completely. I promise to fight for us when times get hard, to choose trust over fear, and to never forget that the most beautiful things in life often come from unexpected beginnings. As they exchanged simple gold bands, the setting sun cast its final golden rays across the water, bathing them in ethereal light. Their kiss was both a culmination and a beginning, passionate yet tender, reflecting all they had overcome and all that awaited them. Later, as they danced barefoot in the sand under a canopy of stars, Amara rested her head against Victor's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Happy? He murmured against her hair. Completely, she replied, tilting her face up to his. Though I'm curious how you orchestrated all this beneath my radar. Victor smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. I enlisted Nora and your assistant team as co-conspirators. They proved remarkably discreet when the cause matters. Amara laughed, recalling how her calendar had mysteriously cleared for this weekend escape. They've earned themselves substantial bonuses. As their intimate celebration continued with champagne and dinner under the stars, Amara marveled at life's unexpected turns. 12 months earlier, she had faced humiliation and heartbreak, believing her chance at true love had vanished with Julian's betrayal. Now, she wore a ring that symbolized genuine commitment, cherished by a man who had fought to deserve her trust. The painful ending that once devastated her had ultimately led to this beginning, infinitely more profound than anything she had dared to imagine. When the celebration wound down and their guests retired to the main house, Victor led Amara to a secluded beach cabana transformed into a honeymoon suite. Rose petals created a path to a canopied bed, while champagne chilled beside a tray of chocolate-covered strawberries. "One last surprise," Victor said, guiding her to the terrace where an infinity pool seemed to merge with the moonlit ocean beyond. "It's perfect," Amara whispered, turning to wrap her arms around his neck. "You're perfect." Victor shook his head, his expression serious despite his smile. "Not perfect," he corrected. "Just perfectly yours." As their lips met in a kiss that promised far more to come, Amara surrendered completely to the love they had fought so hard to preserve and strengthen. Left devastated at the altar once, she had found not just recovery but a love far greater than she had ever imagined possible. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been pain alongside joy, doubts alongside certainty, challenges alongside triumphs. But standing here now, as Mrs. Amara Langston, secure in Victor's arms and their shared future, she wouldn't change a single step of the unexpected path that had led her home. For every ending, no matter how painful, creates space for new beginnings, and sometimes, if we're brave enough to open our hearts again, those new beginnings lead us to the very love we were always meant to find.